Future Trends is brought to you by the Institute for Economics and Peace.
Welcome to the latest edition of Future Trends, the weekly briefing on the changing face of global politics, economics, development, social and conflict. Here's this week's headline stories. Anger in Turkey as Erdogan rival jailed before trial. Netanyahu faces protests as renewed war deepens Israeli divisions. Ethiopia rules out conflict with Eritrea over Red Sea access. Indonesia approves law expanding role of military in government. Debt costs in richest nations, highest since 2007. And dark energy becoming weaker, challenging cosmos models. Now for the latest in politics. A Turkish court jailed Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, President Erdogan's main political rival, pending trial on corruption charges, in a move that led to the country's biggest protests in more than a decade. Netanyahu faces protests as renewed war deepens Israeli divisions. The demonstrators claim the Israeli Prime Minister continues to prioritize his political survival over the security of his country. The lives of Israeli hostages and those of Palestinians in Gaza. For Netanyahu, breaking the ceasefire has helped shore up his coalition amid his ongoing corruption trial and ahead of a key vote on Israel's budget. A poll by think tank the Israeli Democracy Institute found over 70% of Israelis supported negotiating with Hamas for an end to the fighting and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages, as the Palestinian Ministry of Health says more than 50,000 people have been killed there since the start of Israel's military action in response to the October 7th, 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah is sworn in as Namibia's leader. Nandi-Ndaitwah is just the fifth president of Namibia, a sparsely populated nation in southwestern Africa, which was a German colony until the end of World War I, and then won independence from South Africa in 1990 after decades of struggle and a guerrilla war against South African forces. She was a revolutionary fighter and is the first female president. Indonesia approves law expanding role of military in government. Indonesia's parliament passed contentious revisions to the country's military law, which will allocate more civilian posts for military officers and student protests against the changes. Government roles included the Attorney General's Department. South Korean court reinstates impeached PM. The Constitutional Court reinstated Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to the post of acting president, striking down his impeachment. He took over as acting leader from President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was impeached over his imposition of martial law in December. Moving now to stories in conflict. Western officials say Russia behind European sabotage. There are 59 incidents in which European governments, prosecutors, intelligence services, or other Western officials blamed Russia, groups linked to Russia or its ally Belarus, for cyber attacks, spreading propaganda, plotting killings or committing acts of vandalism, arson, sabotage or espionage since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Ethiopia rules out conflict with Eritrea over Red Sea access. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says Ethiopia will not seek conflict with longtime rival Eritrea over access to the Red Sea, amid recent fears about possible war between the neighbours. Fears of war emerged in recent weeks after Eritrea ordered a nationwide military mobilization, and Ethiopia deployed troops towards the border. East Congo ceasefire in trouble as rebels stay in strategic town. A de facto ceasefire between Congolese forces and Rwandan-backed rebels in the eastern Congo town of Walikale appeared to have broken down, with the rebels going back on a pledge to withdraw and accusing the army of violating its own commitments. US and Russia talks on Ukraine war and Black Sea ceasefire, US. And Russian officials held talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at making progress towards a broad ceasefire in Ukraine, with Washington eyeing a separate Black Sea maritime ceasefire deal before securing a wider agreement. Update on Sudan. 2 years ago, Sudan was thrown into disarray when its army and a powerful paramilitary group began a vicious struggle for power. The war, which continues to this day, has claimed more than 150,000 lives. And in what the United Nations has called the world's largest humanitarian crisis, about 12 million people have been forced to flee their homes. Now to the latest in economics. Government debt costs in richest nations, highest since 2007. The amount spent on debt servicing now outstrips the amount spent on defence, police services and housing, a report has found. Across the 38 members of the OECD, debt service costs as a percentage of national income rose to 3.3% in 2024, from 2.4% in 2021. US Fed doesn't expect tariffs to have long-lasting inflation impacts. Economic projections from the US Federal Reserve indicate that while officials see inflation moving up this year more rapidly than previously expected, they also expect the trend to be short-lived. Greenpeace to pay $660 million for defaming oil firm in protests. A US jury has found Greenpeace liable for defamation, ordering it to pay more than $660 million in damages to an oil company for the environmental group's role in one of the largest anti-fossil fuel protests in US history. China reassures American-European multinationals amid trade tensions. China told executives from American and European firms, including Apple, Qualcomm, MasterCard, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca, that the world's second-largest economy is open for business amid a looming tariffs threat to its export-dependent economy. Africa's move toward financial integration with currency exchange marketplace. The Africa Currency Marketplace by the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System PAPSS platform is set to facilitate direct currency exchanges across the continent, reducing reliance on the US dollar and fostering a unified African capital market. Now for the latest in development. Canada and Australia to develop joint military radar in Arctic. Amid growing global interest and competition, the $6 billion system aims to strengthen Arctic defense and counter rising threats from Russia, China, and other adversaries. New system charges an EV in 5 minutes to last 400 kilometers. Chinese electric vehicle maker BYD unveiled a new fast-charging system, intensifying competition in the world's largest auto market and propelling it further ahead of rivals such as Tesla. BYD plans to build 4,000 ultra-fast charging stations across China. Swallowed by the sea, Pakistan's Indus Delta now threatened by canals. Residents say construction of 6 new canals over Indus River will turn more lands in coastal Sindh barren and prone to be lost to the Arabian Sea. US revokes legal status for 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. The latest US crackdown on immigration, effective April 24th, cuts short a 2-year parole granted to the migrants under the former government that allowed them to enter the country by air if they had US sponsors. Robot controlled by mushroom blends, living organisms and machines. Powered by conventional electricity via plug or battery, what sets these robots apart is that they are controlled by a living entity, a king oyster mushroom. By growing the mushroom's mycelium, or root-like threads, into the robot's hardware, a team has engineered 2 types of robots that sense and respond to the environment by harnessing electrical signals made by the fungus and its sensitivity to light. Moving to the latest stories in social. What does 9 months in space do to the body? Nausea, dizziness, and vertigo are common as bones and muscles get used to gravity again. Without the tug of gravity, astronauts' bone and muscle mass deteriorate quickly in space. The muscles that are the most affected are in the back, neck, calves, and thighs. Without a proper diet and exercise routine, Astronauts also lose muscle mass in microgravity faster than they would on Earth. Finland named as happiest country for 8th year. It came ahead of 3 other Nordic countries in this year's UN-sponsored World Happiness Report, while Latin America's Costa Rica and Mexico entered the top 10 for the first time. Both the UK and the US slipped down the list to 23rd and 24th respectively, the lowest ever position for the US. Coventry, first African to lead International Olympic Committee. The Zimbabwean swimming great will replace Thomas Buck in the top job in world sport, becoming the organisation's first African president in its 130-year history. UK's largest ever nuclear submarine to carry 144 warheads. The HMS Dreadnought will be the length of 14 buses, displace 17,000 tonnes of water, and could carry a crew of 130. It has an estimated cost of $39 billion and is due to be launched in the early 2030s. Dark energy is becoming weaker, challenging models of the cosmos. Data from a huge dark energy experiment is starting to suggest our current model of the universe is wrong. Physicists aren't completely sure yet, but they think they'll need a new theory for what the universe is made of. Dark energy is used as a constant to explain how the universe came into existence and operates. And if it is shrinking, a new model is needed to explain how the universe operates.
Future Trends is brought to you by the Institute for Economics and Peace.